All right, hello, this is Mr. Ippolito, and we're going to do a quick recap of what we learned today in class. And so today we're going to, let me just go back in time here, and I will share my screen. And this is our agenda for today. So first of all, today we're focusing on battles of the Civil War. And so Mr. Hahn is going to take us through that. We just want to go over some announcements really quickly on this slide right here. The Civil War Unit Exam, we're going to have one remaining exam, and that is going to be on Monday, June 1st. That is the last exam that we're going to take in class, and it's going to be on antebellum America and the Civil War. The entire class period, the time before, on Wednesday, May 29th, is going to be devoted solely to exam review. And then we're also going to have a YouTube live review on Sunday evening, May 31st at 8 p.m. And so we're going to go over major battles of the Civil War, and Mr. Hahn is going to take that in just a moment. While I'm waiting for Mr. Hahn, I am going to take you through something else really quickly. So there's going to be one assignment left. There's one assignment that you are going to turn in. This is the last graded assignment besides the unit exam, of course, that you're going to be turning in, and that is the Civil War Unit Exam Review Study Guide. So I want to just show you that really, really quickly before we jump into the battles of the Civil War. You'll notice here, if you take a look at this, you'll notice that we start off with the 19th century reform movements. This is the very first thing that we studied in our new unit, followed by the women's rights movement. I have a couple questions, review questions on that. The differences between North and South, little graphic organizer there, table to fill in those responses there. Slavery, the abolitionists, and then today is battles of the Civil War. So moving forward, I have decided that I am not going to give you any additional graded assignments beyond this study guide right here. So we've got battles of the Civil War, and then the Gettysburg Address is going to be our next lesson, the causes and effects of the Civil War, the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, and then vocabulary. So this is it. The work that you are going to do from now until the end of the quarter is just simply going to be to attend class, to learn the new stuff that Mr. Hahn and I are teaching you, and then to take that knowledge and to put it right here into the Civil War Unit Exam Review Study Guide. There's also vocabulary. You'll notice there are a number of vocab terms here, so you want to be aware of those. But that is going to be it. One of the things that we're trying to do as teachers all across the school district is sort of kind of take our foot off the gas. And, you know, typically in these last few weeks, I've been giving you assignment after assignment after assignment after assignment. I've been keeping, just staying on top of it. We're going to start to, like I said, just kind of take our foot off the gas a little bit. This is a big assignment. As you can see, the study guide is 3.25 pages, right? So it's a good sized assignment, but this is the last graded assignment besides the unit exam that you'll get between now and the end of the quarter. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into major battles of the Civil War, and we're going to go over, like I just showed you previously. I'll show this to you again. If you're wondering, Mr. Ippolito, where do I take notes? What do I do? It is right here. This section right here, Battles of the Civil War. This is on the review study guide. This is where you're going to put key details, right? So the Battle of Fort Sumter, where was it? Where did it take place? And then the significance or the impact of the battle. That's where this is going to go right here. So as we go through these battles of the Civil War, if you're wondering, what do I do with this information? Where do I put stuff? It's right here. Key details right here. And then what was the importance? What was the significance, the impact? Why are we studying this battle in particular? Because there were hundreds of battles of the Civil War, but we're only focusing on these few right here because they were the most significant, had the greatest impact.
All right, so we're going to be doing a brief overview of the major battles of the Civil War here. We're only going to be covering 8. 8 of the battles that we think are important during this unit that we, figure that you should know these battles here because of their significance and the details of the battle. We can go to the next slide, please, sir. So we got the first battle here is a Battle of Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. You can kind of see where Fort Sumter was located in the center of, at the entrance of Charleston Harbor. Charleston being one of the few major ports that the South had. They need in order to control the commerce and trade that they needed to keep the war going. Next slide, please, sir. So remember that South Carolina seceded from the Union in December on December 20th in 1860, but then the Union still controlled Fort Sumner, which was an island fort at the entrance of Charleston Harbor. And because they controlled this fort, they effectively controlled what ships could come in and out of Charleston Harbor. So the South didn't like that at all, and they needed Charleston Harbor to keep supplies flowing. So they decided to play the waiting game a little bit until the Union troops in Fort Sumner were running out of supplies, and before then, and then they laid siege to Fort Sumner before the Union was able to resupply their troops in the fort, and they laid siege to Fort Sumner for 36 hours. And then after 36 hours, the Union troops ended up surrendering the fort to the Confederates, and then the Confederates had regained control of Charleston Harbor. This battle was significant because it signaled the start of the Civil War. Next slide, please, sir. Thank you. The next battle we're going to be talking about is the Battle of Bull Run. It happened near Manassas, in the city of the town of Manassas in in Virginia, in the South. And next slide, please. So it was fought on July 21st in 1861, about 25 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. Many residents from Washington, D.C. actually came out to watch this battle. They decided to, bring out picnic baskets and try to make a day of it to spectate this battle, thinking that it was going to be a quick and easy victory. Both sides did have very inexperienced troops fighting during this battle because the last war that the Americans had fought was the Mexican-American War, and a lot of the veterans of that war, they were already out of the army by then. But the Confederates, the Southern troops, they had better leaders, such as General Stonewall Jackson. General Jackson ended up getting his nickname Stonewall because he held his ground when the Union troops were charging his battle line, and instead of running away, he actually stood his ground and actually beat back the Union charge. The Battle of Bull Run was actually a defeat for the Union because once again they were very inexperienced. They were not very well trained, and their attacks were beaten back by the Confederates, and a lot of them were getting killed, and so it was a major defeat for the Union troops. It was bad enough that they actually decided a lot of their troops were throwing down their weapons and running back to Washington, D.C. with their officers chasing after them. The Battle of Bull Run was significant because it forced a lot of the Americans from both the North and the South to realize that the war was going to last a lot longer and cost more lives than they had originally thought. Next slide, please, sir. Next battle we're going to talk about is the Battle of Antietam. The Battle of Antietam took place near a place called Antietam Creek in Maryland. It was part of General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the northern states. Next slide, please, sir. So the battle took place on September 17th in 1862. Like I said, the Confederates had invaded Maryland, and they were led by General Robert E. Lee. We remember him. He captured John Brown during his raid on Harper's Ferry during his raid on Harper's Ferry, the arsenal in Harper's Ferry. The Union troops were led by General George B. McClellan, who was ordered to drive Lee out of Maryland. And the Union troops actually outnumbered the Confederates 87,000 to the Confederates 38,000 troops. So they had the numerical advantage. The North had the numerical advantage during this battle, and that ended up leading them to victory. The Battle of Antietam was a Union win, but the North failed to. But the North, specifically General McClellan, he failed in a sense in the battle because he refused to pursue General Lee's forces. Usually, when you win a battle, you chase after the enemy when they're running away, so that you can capture them, so they can no longer fight throughout the rest of the war. But General McClellan didn't do that, and General Lee ended up retreating back to Virginia where he could fight another day. The Battle of Antietam was the single bloodiest day of U.S. military history because 22,717 Americans were killed during this battle on both sides. So both Union and Confederate, between both the Union and the Confederate troops, 22,717 were killed. 5 days after the Battle of Antietam, President Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, effectively freeing the slaves that were in the areas controlled by the South. So that's going to come into a little bit more details later. Next slide, please, sir. So next we have the Battle of Gettysburg, which happened in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This battle was part of another invasion of the North that General Lee had had conducted after the Battle of Antietam. So remember, after he was defeated at Antietam, he retreated back to Virginia. Well, he came back again some time later, and this time he made it as far as to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. So this battle took place on July 1st to July 3rd in 1863. This is the largest battle of the war. There were around almost 200,000 almost 200,000 troops on both sides that were participating in this fight. The Southern troops, the Confederacy, they were led by General Lee, who had invaded Pennsylvania, and the Northern troops, they were led by General George Meade, who had replaced General McClellan at this point in time. The battle was a Union victory, but it came at a very great cost. Between both sides, again, between the Union and the Confederacy forces, approximately 51,000 Americans were killed, wounded, or missing in action. So there were 51,000 casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg was considered a turning point in the war because General Lee, after he was defeated here, he would again retreat back to the South, and he would never be able to invade the northern states again like he did before. 5 months after the battle, in November of 1863, a national cemetery was established on the battlegrounds at Gettysburg. President Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg Address to honor the Union casualties of the battle. We're going to get into more details on that on a later lesson next week. Next slide, please, sir. So the next battle we're going to talk about is the Siege of Vicksburg. The Siege of Vicksburg occurred near Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is a city on the Mississippi River. You can see here. Next slide, please, sir. So the siege lasted from May 18th in 1863 to July 4th of the same year. Now, at the beginning of the war, the Union had a plan to surround the southern states with a blockade that would effectively control how the number of ships that were entering and leaving the southern states, so that would stop their supply train, that would stop their cotton from leaving the South so they could sell to Europe or Asia or overseas, and it would stop supplies like weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies coming into the South to help with their war effort. Part of this, and they called this plan the Anaconda Plan. You can kind of see it right here with the picture right here with the snake surrounding the southern states on the ocean. Part of this plan included controlling the Mississippi River. Controlling the Mississippi River would split the Confederate states in two. Therefore, they wouldn't. The states like Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Alabama, they wouldn't be able to get help from in the form of weapons, ammunition, supplies from the western states of the Confederacy, like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Kansas. So in order to do this, the North, they needed to control the Mississippi River, and they were doing a good job at it until they reached the city of Vicksburg, which is the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi. Because they were unable to take the city of Vicksburg outright, the Union troops led by General Ulysses S. Grant, they laid siege to the city of Vicksburg for more than 40 days. You can see on the bottom right picture there, you can see a bunch of Union ships that were going up and down the Mississippi River for more than 40 days, just blasting the city with their cannons and trying to get the Confederate troops to surrender. And then after more than 40 days, these troops did surrender to General Grant, and they surrendered the day after that General Lee was defeated at the Battle of Gettysburg up in Pennsylvania. Now, the siege of Vicksburg was considered a turning point in the war because now, and it was considered a turning point in the war, and it was significant because now the Union had control of the Mississippi River all the way from the north to the south in New Orleans. Next slide, please, sir. Atlanta, and then we have the March to the Sea. These two events took place in the state of Georgia. You can kind of see them right here. These purple arrows in the state of Georgia on the map that are heading from Tennessee. It looks like southeast until they reach the coast city of Savannah, Georgia. We're going to cover that part right here. Next slide, please, sir. So the Battle of Atlanta clearly took place near Atlanta, Georgia. Union forces under the command of General William Tecumseh Sherman, they were ordered to capture Atlanta. One reason being that Atlanta was a major supply hub. A lot of the Confederate forces, they shipped a lot of the Confederate forces, they shipped their supplies to Atlanta to be divided out to where they were needed. And then also Atlanta was a large railroad hub in the South. Remember that the South didn't have as many railroads as the North did prior to the war, but then Atlanta was where a lot of their railroads came together they came together in the South. So taking the city of Atlanta would have been a major blow to the Confederates' supply train that would have been able to help them keep fighting this war, because it's not about, generals and it's not about generals and technology that wins wars. It's about men and supplies that actually wins wars. So back to the topic at hand. Fighting during the Battle of Atlanta began on July 21st in 1864 and lasted until September 2nd, when Union forces, they captured Atlanta from the Confederates. So it was a Union victory, the Battle of Atlanta, but it was also a huge political victory for President Lincoln's re-election campaign in 1864. President Lincoln, as we know, was elected in 1860, but then 4 years has passed, so he had to run again for president. And a lot of people, they were not liking President Lincoln because of how the war was going. They blamed him for a lot of the deaths that was a lot of the men that were being killed during the war. And his political opponent, if you remember, General George McClellan, he was actually running for president under the Democrats, and President Lincoln was running for he was running for re-election under the Republicans. So George McClellan was going around saying to everybody, if I'm elected president, I will negotiate for peace with the South so that we can end this bloody war and, bring our boys home. And he was getting a lot of support behind his message. So George McClellan was getting really popular. And, Abraham Lincoln, he needed a big victory in order to get the popularity behind him so that he'd be able to get more votes. And that's what happened with the Battle of Atlanta. They took Atlanta, which was a big victory for the Union. And President Lincoln was able to say, the war's going fine. We just took Atlanta. And George McClellan ended up losing all of his support, and he ended up losing the election, and President Lincoln was reelected in 1864. Now back to Georgia. General Sherman, after he captured Atlanta, he continued marching southeast towards the port city of Savannah, Georgia, in his infamous March to the Sea. Now, if you remember the geography of the South, they didn't have that many ports in the South, so they had to keep and hold on to the ones that they had. And if they lost one of these ports, like Savannah, Georgia, or Charleston, South Carolina, that would be a major blow again to the supply train of the South. So General Sherman decided, we're just gonna do this march to the sea, and we're just gonna destroy everything. So during this march, Union troops, under a scorched earth policy, they destroyed not only the military targets, but then they also destroyed the Southern industry, what little industry that they had in the South, the infrastructure, the railroads, the telegraph lines, the roads, the canals that they had, anything you can think of in terms of infrastructure. The Union troops destroyed that as well. And then they also destroyed civilian property. We're talking plantations, we're talking crops, we're talking fields, we're talking houses in general and livestock. So these Union troops were destroying everything in their path. I recall reading a story about how these troops actually spread, I forget, I think it was like saltpeter or gunpowder over these fields so that these farmers, they wouldn't be able to go out and plant their crops again. That's how detailed they were getting this scorched earth policy as well. So, yeah.
Mr. Hahn, I just want to jump in really quickly.
Yes,
on the study guide, I called this, the vocab term that I used was total war. I just want everyone to know, I put it in the chat, but I just want everyone to know that scorched earth is basically the same policy as total war.
Mm-hmm.
It's bringing the war to the people. I had heard a quote, something like, they won't be able to use these farms for the next 100 years, something
Mm-hmm.
like that, when they were salting the fields. I had heard that same story you heard. And then Jeremiah is also asking, are these slides on the website or Google Classroom? And they're in Google Classroom right now, Jeremiah, and I will post them later today on MrIppolito.com as well. But always, our slideshows every day are always posted on MrIppolito.com, and this particular slideshow is just embedded right into our agenda. Okay, I'm done.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. So, if you see on the bottom right, on the bottom picture there, you can see these Union troops, and they're you can see a lot of them. They're in the center of the picture. They're tearing up that railroad track. They're literally prying the rails from the ground so that the South couldn't use that railroad track again. You see on the bottom right there that they're chopping down that telegraph pole. And then in the background, you're seeing them set fire to a bunch of these, what looks to be warehouses or plantations and such. So they were really going for scorched earth on this one here. And then also during this time, these Union troops, they encountered They encountered a large number of slaves that they confiscated because they were still considered property in the South, and that's what these Southerners were saying when they encountered these Union troops. You can't take our property. So these troops said, okay, then we're just going to confiscate your property then, because the Emancipation Proclamation says that we can. And then once they were confiscated, the troops set these slaves free and told them, start heading north. You'll be more free up there. And a lot of slaves actually did head north. So the South, the South never really recovered from the March to the Sea. And it was really significant because the damage that was done by General Sherman and his troops, it helped lead the South to surrender later on during the war next year. Any questions? I see, Emily, you got your hand up.
I thought the Emancipation Proclamation was after all the wars. I thought it was
No. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued during the war. Mm-hmm. It was Frederick Douglass? He actually pressured President Abraham Lincoln to make the war about slavery, because remember, President Lincoln was initially telling everybody, the war, I don't want to take away their slaves. I don't want to, it's not about slavery. It's about keeping the Union together. If they break away, we're going to go in there to keep them in the Union by force. It's not about slavery initially, but then over time, as the war continued, President Lincoln eventually made the war about ending slavery, which he did by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. Does that answer your question, Emily?
Yeah.
Cool.
And just to jump in really quickly,
yes,
because Emily, you might be thinking of the 13th Amendment. So the Emancipation Proclamation was it was a temporary measure, right? It was a measure that was specifically designed to, which we'll talk more about next week, but it was a measure designed to release the slaves in the areas that were under Union control. Excuse me. I'm sorry. No, back it up. Under Southern control. So the criticism of Abraham Lincoln was he was freeing the slaves in areas where he couldn't, and in the areas where he could free the slaves, he wouldn't. So Kentucky did not secede. Tennessee, there were portions of Tennessee that remained loyal to Tennessee officially seceded, but there were portions of Tennessee that remained loyal to the Union. Maryland remained loyal to the Union. So in these states, these border states that refused to secede, states like Kentucky and Maryland, those slaves stayed slaves because Lincoln wanted to play nice with the whites that lived there. He didn't want to anger them. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to back off. I'm going to play nice. And so the Emancipation Proclamation only frees the slaves in the states that are currently in rebellion, right? So, so the 13th Amendment, which happened after the Civil War, right at the end in 1865, that is going to free all of the slaves permanently for good forever.
Oh, so the Emancipation only did it for the people, for the slaves in the South, not in the North?
South.
Yes, in the South, and specifically those areas of the South that were not under Union control. For example, by the time the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, the United States already had control of New Orleans in Louisiana. So the slaves that were in New Orleans, not freed. The slaves that were in Kentucky or Maryland, not freed. The slaves that were in areas that Lincoln technically had no control over because they were still in rebellion, they were still part of a different country, he let those slaves go. So that was,
Gotcha.
so in a way, the Emancipation Proclamation was kind of, it was almost more symbolic, rather than, because it was very significant, but it only freed those slaves in the areas that were still under Confederate control. We'll learn more about that next week.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Janessa, you have a question for us, yes?
Yes. I have a quick question. What's the difference between a siege and a battle?
Okay, so, oh Lord, excuse me. So a siege, if you remember the Alamo, no pun intended. If you remember the Alamo, remember how the Mexican forces, they surrounded the Alamo from in the movie, and then they started shooting their cannons at the Alamo for like 13 days?
Yes.
That was a siege. A battle is when both sides, they meet it out and they, what was it? The difference between a siege and a battle is that both sides in a battle are fighting each other. What was it? Both sides are meeting on a field and they're fighting it out between each other. Neither side has the advantage of defending or attacking. They're both just meeting at an area to mutually attack one another. In a siege, one side is defending. In a battle, they're both attacking each other in an area that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Emily asked, could two sides lay siege to each other at the same time, or is it only one side? Theoretically, yeah, Damien, you're right. They could if they were, but then it would. Well, we can get into more details on that after class if y'all want to stick around. That's a good question. All right.
Deep question.
Yes, indeed. Let's move on to the next slide, please, sir. We're going to be talking about the last two events here. The capture of Richmond and the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. These two events happened in the state of Virginia. And the two major figures here that you want to remember is General Ulysses S. Grant here on the left and General Robert E. Lee on the right. Now, next slide, please, sir. So Richmond, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy. So Richmond was their Washington, D.C. Like Washington, D.C. was the capital of the United States. Richmond was the capital of the Confederate States of America. So General Grant's efforts to capture Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, began with the siege of Petersburg on June 15th in 1864. So June 15th, that's when they started, they surrounded the city of Petersburg in Virginia, started blasting it with cannons and sending their boys forward to try to take the city of Petersburg. The siege lasted for 9 months. 9 months of just cannon fire and battle, and eventually devolved to the point where Union troops, they were digging miles of trenches. That's these paths that are deep into the ground, and they were digging miles of these trenches towards Petersburg. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you right now, I've dug many of fighting positions and foxholes with these little these little shovels called entrenching tools. Digging trenches is no fun, I will tell you right now. And to dig miles of these trenches is probably even less fun. So on April 2nd, in 1865, after 9 months, General Lee abandoned Petersburg and the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, and because it just wasn't he wasn't able to hold it any longer. They were starting to run out of supplies. They were starting to run out of ammunition. There was just too many wounded or too many dead. So General Lee abandoned Petersburg and Richmond and retreated west, deeper into Virginia, towards a place called Appomattox Courthouse. So on the 2nd of April, General Grant, he captured Richmond and, he captured Petersburg and Richmond in Virginia, and then he continued chasing after General Lee and eventually caught up with him a week later on April 9th at Appomattox Courthouse. And then they had a short battle there in Appomattox. And then after the battle, General Lee surrendered his army to General Grant at the home of Wilmer McLean, if you remember from the Battle of Bull Run, who had moved from Manassas, Virginia to Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia to escape the Civil War. So I forget what the quote was that Mr. Ippolito, maybe you can help me out here. I forget what the quote was that he said to anybody and everybody who would listen.
The war began in my backyard and ended in my front parlor.
There you have it right there. The war began in his backyard at the Battle of Bull Run and then ended in his front parlor at Appomattox Courthouse. So, yeah, that's what are the odds of that? What are the odds of that? All right. I think that covers the major battles of the Civil War, sir. Does anybody have any questions about Richmond and the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse? Doesn't look like it, sir. All right. Whew.
Let me unmute myself. There we go. Okay, so now that we have learned about those battles of the Civil War, we are... Oh, are we going to breakout rooms? You know what? I never thought of that, Nathan, but I think we could totally do breakout rooms because there you have work to do. Yes. Hey, Brandon is asking, who cut your hair? Brandon, if you're talking about mine, it was my wife who gave me my haircut. So there you go. Anyway, let's talk about what you're actually going to be doing now. Thank you, Brandon. So we're going over the Civil War Unit Exam Review Study Guide. This is in Google Classroom. I pushed this out earlier this morning. So this part right here, Battles of the Civil War, some of you have already been filling this out. If not, this is the part that you're going to fill out right here. It's like the middle of page 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to hang out, Mr. Hahn and I. There was a question. Aiden asked a question, and I'm going to scroll. I'm going to try to find Aiden's question because he asked it a while ago. There's been a lot that's been going on in the chat. Aiden asked, hey, is it true that grades can only go up after May 22nd? So I just want to make this clear because there has been some confusion. And so just to clarify that, the district last week put out like some grading policies. One thing was that there will be no final exams. In other words, no like cumulative quarterfinal or semester final exam, or like some teachers, especially in high school, might give an exam for the entire school year. So we're not doing any cumulative final exams. This last exam that you are taking of the quarter is simply for these last like 4 or 5 weeks of school. So that's all that is going to be covered in this exam. So there's no final exam. We're not doing a quarter final. It is just the exam for this particular unit. So it is possible if you don't do that exam, or if you don't do your best on that exam, then your grade could go down. But to answer the other part of your question, Aiden, is the district has recommended that the teachers kind of take their foot off the gas in a metaphorical sense. We kind of take our foot off the gas and start to ease up in these last couple weeks, which is why this study guide is the last graded assignment that I am giving you, the mandatory required graded assignment. So after the assignments that have already been done, right, the ones that you should have already completed, the ones that have already been due, the final graded assignments will be the study guide and then the exam. For those students who don't do well on the exam, there will be, and you'll get your grade instantaneously. There will be a retake opportunity, a retake activity that you can do to earn up to 80% credit on the final exam. So, but you have to take the final exam first. Okay. Jeremiah says, I think we should just not take the test. Well,
that's your choice.
That's
that's within your choice. I mean, we can't force you to take the test or not, but then there will be consequences. You will get a 0, and you will have to explain to your mom and dad why you got a 0 on the final exam.
So Damien, to answer the question about the guidelines, do they go for all classes? The district has given that recommendation to all teachers that they kind of start to these last few weeks, start to ease up a little bit. Let's give those kids who just need to catch up, let's give them a chance to catch up. That's a recommendation to teachers. Teachers aren't required to follow that recommendation, but I think it's a reasonable recommendation, so I'm going to follow that. Teachers are also required, they are mandated to not give final exams. So no teacher is allowed to give a cumulative final that covers the entire quarter or the entire semester or the entire school year. Final exams, especially as you know them in high school, you haven't even been to high school yet, those final exams are all mandated as canceled by the district. You cannot give a final exam, a huge cumulative final exam. And then the last thing, this gets a little bit more complicated in terms of grading, but there will be, instead of A, B, C, D, F, there's going to be A, B, C credit, right? So a D is going to be called, you don't need to worry about this, I'm just letting you know just for your information. A D is going to be called credit, and then an F is going to be called no credit, right? So, and then as much as possible, we're trying to make it so that every student, we try to pull them across the finish line so they can at least get credit for the class. We're trying to have as few students as possible get no credit because we understand this has been a challenging time. Okay, I'm not sure what your comment means, Asher. So if you want, we can talk after we're done here. So do we do all the way up to page 2 in the? Okay, so Nathan, what you can do, ultimately, you're gonna have to do this whole thing, right? And we're gonna go over the whole thing at the very end, right before the exam. But if you want to start catching up with these, you can. Really, the only thing you have to do right now is the battles of the Civil War, right? Cool. Yep. So yeah, just the battles right now. All right. So here's what's going to happen. At this point, if you have questions, you want to stick around, or you want to help each other work together on the battles of the Civil War, then stick around. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and I would say I'm going to let you go now. So if you want to leave, then I'm going to wave goodbye to you and say it's been great seeing you. Goodbye. And